I'm back with Susie Oddball, and this is part 4. Susie's going to talk about her life in Manchester. Go ahead, Susie.
Thank you very much, Jilliana. Well, I met Eric, and I fell totally in love with Eric and his painting. He was an amazing artist.
Did he paint your boots?
I can't remember. Painted more than that. Anyway, he painted a great picture. He was a great talkster, I'd call him. Had a gift of the gab. So I fell madly in love with him. I do remember the Nuki moon. It was beautiful. And I had to tell my Yugoslavian boyfriend that I had fallen in love, basically. So I sent him a letter. It took me a long time to decide why. And what I didn't realise is that he was going to be coming to collect me, to take me around Europe hitchhiking. So he actually turned out I was doing a little bit of... I used to always do little jobs. All through my life I did little jobs. And at that time I was doing some painting and decorating with my brother. And we'd done rag collecting and all sorts of things before. But this was painting, and I was in the middle of painting and decorating. And Brene came from Yugoslavia. And you could see in my face was a picture. I thought, uh-oh, yeah. And he'd come, and he hadn't received the letter because he'd come a day before he was supposed to. So, ironically, I had to tell him. And it was the most hardest thing I had to do. And my mum was furious. My mum loved Brene. She wanted me to marry Brene. Yeah. Anyway, long and short of it is she kept in touch with Brene and went on holidays with him and he actually married and had a family, and she still went on holidays to see him, and they were very, very close. And I went off with Eric to Manchester very quickly after I met Eric, actually. I think I needed to get away as well. So when I was in Manchester, I met loads of interesting people. I went to Salford Tech, a technical college.
I used to live in Manchester, you know.
Right. Well, I lived in Eccles, but went to Salford Tech. And Eric had been at the Salford Technical doing art and stuff. Now, he knew quite a lot of crazy people. And one of the crazy people that he knew from the Magic Village days, which was just before I went there, and that was an underground psychedelic scene, was John Cooper Clarke, we used to call him, Clarke. And he was an anarchist poet. He wasn't a punk poet. He wasn't John Cooper Clarke, he was, but he had his wife and I Married a Monster from Outer Space, which was one of his poems. It was about his first wife, who I knew. I did tell him off about that. Anyway, so I also knew quite a few people who were in the music scene. There was a guy called Lindsay, and he used to live in a windmill, and he used to manage all these big bands in Manchester. So I used to go out and, watch a lot of bands from and Lindsay and Selwyn and Josie Burke were my friends, and they were Jewish friends. And Josie Burke and Selwyn were from Liverpool. And Joe...
Who was from Liverpool?
Selwyn and also Josie Burke. And Josie Burke, unfortunately, in those days, because there was a lot of drug culture, he had gone to India, and when he came back, he died of an overdose, which was so sad. And his poem was about a little girl holding a pearl in her hand. It was the most amazing poem, and I'll never forget that. So, tribute to Josie Burke. So after Manchester, while I was there, of course, I had my first child in a place called Hope Hospital. And it was a breech birth, and I was in labour for about 48 hours. And I was only 17 when I was pregnant, so I was just 18 when I had the baby. And I was also working. I was working in the civil service. So I had a childminder eventually looking after the baby. And I carried on working. And Eric was a printer, also in a private insurance company. I can't remember, Price Waterhouse.
Oh, that's well known. Yes.
And he eventually came down to London, was working for them too.
Yeah.
So he was a printer for them. But we used to do things like print posters from screen printing, and we did a Loudon Wainwright poster that he wanted us to do, commissioned us to do. And we had a little bed set, and we'd have all the posters all spread over our bed and our cupboards and stuff. And we used to mass produce these posters.
Well,
in
that
our
was the
little bedsit.
period of putting posters on the wall
Yes.
with thumbtacks.
Yeah, and Eric's artwork was amazing, and unfortunately we lost it through a fire. It set fire to portfolio in the chimney fire.
It would all be psychedelic, I suppose.
It was amazing. So that was Manchester. I loved Manchester.
How many years did you live there?
I lived there for 6 years.
Okay.
And had a great experience there.
Okay.
And a lot of my family came up to Manchester. My cousin came up, my brother came up, and lived there. And I used to take people on trips to my Susi long cuts to the museum in Manchester that had everything. It wasn't, you know, the London museums had the British Museum, the Geography Museum, but this museum had everything, and it was right in the centre of town. But you go with me and I'll take you on a nice long cut, not a short cut. But you'd see there was actually proper lizards in the museum, and then the floor down would be the Egyptology. It's an amazing museum. So anyway, that was
Do you
one of my...
still have Manchester connections?
Not in the same way. Juggling wise, I do. Yeah, but I lost a lot of my connections. Although it felt like for years that there was a place ready to slip back into if I'd have wanted to.
And is your ex-husband still in Manchester?
No, he lives in Glasgow now.
Oh, Glasgow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he does go down to Manchester to see his sisters.
Right.
But yeah, I was told by Eric's mum, God bless her soul, Nora, that I was the lady from Sin City.
London. You were Mrs. Who then?
I was Mrs. Whittle.
Whittle?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I knew a crazy lady in America called Beatrice Whittle, but she had an S on the end. It was Whittles.
Mine was
So
Susan
the name Stuart Maxwell, where did that come
Maxwell
from?
Stewart.
Sorry, Maxwell Stewart.
That came from my second husband.
Okay.
But that's another story.
Yes, it is.
So anyway, I came with my husband and my son down to London, and we lived in London from Manchester, and I started to teach. I decided that I'd leave the civil service and I'd teach primary school, but I ended up in a special school for 5 years.
Okay.
But I used to get called, instead of Miss Whittle, I used to get called Miss Skittle. Because I started to learn to juggle too.
Okay. Wait a minute. Who taught you how to juggle?
Now, what happened was, very, very soon after I moved to London,
Yes.
Eric, by that time, had been playing jazz for a long time.
Which instrument?
He had to choose. Well, he was doing jazz guitar, but he had to choose from a saxophone and a guitar because he decided he wanted to specialise in one of them.
Okay.
We were always called the students because of the noise that came out of our house. It was always music and stuff. We always had parties and things. But he decided to make a duo with another jazz guitarist. And that's what they did down in London. So besides being a printer with Price Waterhouse in London, in his spare time he used to be a jazz musician too.
Where did the juggling come in?
The juggling came when I met some jugglers, a whole group of them, a troupe of them, and they'd come from Switzerland, and they'd just come from doing shows there, and they started doing shows in London, in Covent Garden. And
busking.
They were
busking in Covent Garden.
They were, yeah.
Yeah.
Doing street shows.
Yes,
and they were staying upstairs to a friend called Peter. And Peter said to me, warned me that I was going to have some jugglers. And I said, well, could I meet them? And as a teacher, I was very curious. So I did. And we'll make that the next story.
All right. Thank you, Susie. Susie the juggler.